So welcome back. A year and a half after Chancellor Scholz speech that announced a course correction of 180 degrees towards foreign and defense policy of his country. Where are we standing now? Is Germany become the superpower in geopolitics as well as it is perceived as one in economic sense? The speakers on the next panel will discuss this subject, and they are Rachel Tausendfreund, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Florian Bieber, Professor of Southeast European History and Politics and Director of the Center for Southeast European Studies at the University of Graz, Christoph Matschie, former member of the German Bundestag, Chairman of the Board, Ernst Abbe Foundation, and moderator in this panel is Anne Kuchenbecker, Senior Director at Strategic Partnerships European Council on Foreign Relations. Please, dear panelists, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to this panel on Zeitenwende. The word has, after Chancellor Scholz used it in his speech, has made a steep career. It's widely used as a German word in English publications, in speeches and so on. It means, if you translate it, an historical turning point, and it has become a signifier of this change, turning point in German foreign policy. It was named the word of the year in 2022 in Germany. And so after this speech, the expectations, of course, were very high. And I think that the fact that we have an entire panel dedicated to German Zeitenwende at this conference reflects these expectations and these hopes for this German shift. And I would like to kick us off with my panelists here to take stock where we are. So 1.5 years have passed after this speech. What are the changes? Where are we with Zeitenwende? And it includes defense and security policy. It includes energy, de-risking, and then finally also the mental shift. So the Zeitenwende im Kopf, the Zeitenwende in the heads of politicians and the German public. So Christoph, I would love to start with you and see, so what is your assessment?
Well, maybe let's start with the first point in the speech of Olaf Scholz. The first point was we have to support Ukraine. Ukraine has to withstand. And the second point was we have to overcome our dependency on Russia. And the third point, we have to step up our defense capabilities. So if I look to the first point, supporting of Ukraine, I mean, that has been very successful so far. For sure, there are still open questions on certain types of missiles, but if you look at the whole picture, we were able to support Ukraine for more than 1.5 years now, and we stand ready to continue with the support of Ukraine, and there is no doubt that Europe will continue. And as well in the United States, it is debated, but I think United States will also continue to support Ukraine. To what extent, we will discuss. The second point, reducing dependency, and there we look first to our energy dependency. Germany was able to be completely independent now from Russian oil and gas. Within a very short time, we have built up, for example, LNG terminals in an unprecedented speed in Germany, and we have found new suppliers for gas and oil. And we have accelerated the rollout of renewable energies in Germany. So we are on a good way. The third point is more difficult to step up German defense capabilities. We see some first steps. Let me first look to a European initiative. We have the European Sky Shield initiative proposed by Germany. 18 European countries follow this initiative. Germany has decided to station a complete battle brigade in Lithuania. And then we have decisions to buy new fighter planes, the F-35 from United States. And we have a political decision, at least, on the new European air combat system together with France, and also on the main battleground system. So there are still many obstacles on the way, but the necessary political decisions have been made in this time. And let me have a last look to the budget discussion. The parliament has decided 100 billion special fund for German defense forces. But what has not been decided yet is the regular budget increase that is necessary over the coming years. So for the next 2, 3, or maybe 4 years, we are fine with the extra budget, but then we have to step up the regular budget, and that is not seen in the financial planning so far. And this is a weak point because for deciding on certain budgets, you have to have a long-term security in the financial planning. So that's still a weak point. Maybe let me make a point there, so
Sure.
we have some other questions as well.
Sure. Let me press you a little bit. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the government's performance so far?
I think the performance is not 100%, but I think 80% has been achieved from my point of view, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, do you agree with that?
With
assessment?
the 8 out of 10?
Yes.
I mean, maybe, yeah, I might go for 7. But I do think, I get asked a lot, is the Zeitenwende real? And I would say it's real. Is it enough? Probably not, but we'll get to that later in the discussion. I think first, if you want to talk about the Zeitenwende, you have to know where Germany started, right? So where did this turning point start? And if you look back to January of 2022, when the US was warning, there was the military buildup on the border, and the US was warning that Russia was planning to attack. And 80%, if not 90% of the German political class, of the German media, didn't really believe it, was accusing the US of being escalatory. And you may remember the very controversial offer to send 5,000 helmets to Ukraine to help protect them from these 100,000 soldiers. And now Germany is the second biggest supplier of weapons to Ukraine. So that's a very significant shift if you start where Germany started in January of 2022. So there was I have the numbers here, there was an ARD poll in March, and 40% of Germans said the weapons shipments from Germany were sufficient, and 16% said they could be or should be even more. So that's 63% of the German population in favor of at least, if not more, weapon supplies into an active war. I mean, this is a very fundamental shift. The Berlin Pulse is another sort of survey operation done by the Körber Stiftung. In 2017, 32% of Germans were in favor of higher military spending, 32. In 2022, that number was 60%. And 2022 spending is already higher than 2017, okay? Finally, on the 2% and NATO, again, to talk about where Germany started, and in particular, the Social Democrats, right, the party of the Chancellor. Sorry, Christoph. In 2017, you had a foreign minister, Sigmar Gabriel, who opposed publicly, strongly, the goal of 2% spending. You had a foreign minister in 2016 accusing NATO of saber rattling, right? This is not a party that kind of has a strong, solid support either for 2% or for NATO in its history. In the coalition contract, they didn't mention the 2%. They mentioned 3% in order to not have to mention 3% guarantee of military spending. And now you will not hear any SPD politician, anyone in the government questioning the 2%. Now, are they going to actually spend the 2%? You know, this is what we'll get to. That remains a little uncertain, but the commitment is really there. And so I think it is a very significant shift in public opinion and in political opinion.
Great, thank you. Florian, where do you fall compared to Christoph and Rachel?
Well, I think I would also be somewhere in that 7 to 8 range. I was thinking of that as well. And especially, I mean, I would like to bring in kind of the comparative perspective. I mean, living in Austria where you know, energy dependency was very similar to Germany, and there nothing has moved. I mean, basically, we're still in the same position of dependence on Russian energy supplies, and that's not even a controversy, or it's a very minor controversy. So I think if one compares it to other countries, that shift is even more dramatic, and also the whole debate has really moved forward in Germany in a way which, you know, we take for granted that it should have moved forward because of the war. And if we compare it to other countries, we see that that's not at all automatic. And I think in that sense, the very fact that the term Zeitenwende was introduced by Chancellor Scholz in the beginning, I think really helped to push the debate forward in a way which I think if it hadn't been framed in this way, in the very beginning, I think this would have not been possible. So I think in that sense, it really allowed for the debate, you know, to kind of push also the public and the whole discussion forward in Germany. And I think, you know, the problem which I really see is very much that one still does not, one gets these moments of hesitancy when it talks about new weapon systems to be supplied to Ukraine. And I think that undermines a lot of the Zeitenwende logic, because I mean, the logic is, you know, to be a lot more forthcoming, a lot more kind of ready to take these steps, to also take risks in a certain way. And I think one gets the sense that there's still a high level of risk adverseness in the public debate in Germany. And also I think where I think I would say I would be more on the 7 side of things rather than the 8 side of things is when it comes to visions about the kind of implications of all of this. I mean, there's one thing of saying, you know, we need to support Ukraine, we need to kind of step up defense spending, but when it comes to kind of visions for Europe, you know, which are the consequences in terms of, you know, when we talk about enlargement policy. I mean, yes, Germany has been, you know, coming on board with the whole idea of bringing Ukraine into the process, but in terms of the vision of how to achieve this and how to look at Europe as a project resulting from Russian aggression, the ideas still come much more from France, and I think they're kind of a more proactive, not just a responsive, you know, but if this is a Zeitenwende, i.e., if this is a turning point, you know, what does that mean in terms of the future of the European Union? And I think there, I haven't seen Germany take. I mean, I don't even want to use the word lead, but you know, kind of bringing in new ideas to really kind of change the dynamics. And I think this is really what is needed is not just responding to the aggression, but also then finding a new way to construct this European project based on that. And there I think there's still a lot of space for let's say, more ideas.
So overall, it's a more positive assessment. So it's real, it's not perfect, but things are on the way. More has to happen. But I think I want to address a little bit this disconnect that we see, and I think that was also spelled out in the framing of our panel. So the question, is it for real? Can we trust that this will continue? Is this the real turning point and no falling back into the old patterns when things changed? So I would love for you to drill down a little bit, you know, why. So if Germany is doing all these things moving forward in the right direction, why doesn't the perception among partners doesn't match? And maybe now we start here with you, Florian.
Well, I think the communication is often very, you know, imperfect. I mean, I think, you know, this is what I was pointing to when it talks about, you know, weapons deliveries systems where we get, no, this is escalatory. I mean, this whole argument that the delivery of weapons is escalatory for the conflict is, I think, a very flawed logic. And I think that really undermines the willingness to then deliver. So, and the fact that Germany is the second largest supplier is not visible. I mean, in a certain way, Germany is underselling itself in many ways in the communication strategy. And I think this is something which, of course, is maybe a more historical and broader problem, but I think it's one which becomes visible here. And that's why I think the effect is not as great as actually the substance behind it. So I think in that sense, there is, I would say that there could be better communicated. Of course, you can also see the difficulties of having a coalition which is a difficult coalition, or at least one which is complex. And there, one doesn't always get a sense that the government is speaking with one voice. And so I think all of that kind of blurs the overall actually substance which stands behind the messaging. So I would say, to some degree, it's the lack of messaging. And then I feel it comes back to the other point I made. It's the kind of lack of a larger vision which stands behind it, which at least isn't always visible in the wider European context. Because again, it's a European debate which we need. We need a European Zeitenwende, not just a German Zeitenwende. And there I see, and of course we talked in the previous panel as well about the challenges we have in other EU countries. And there, I think, for the Zeitenwende to exist as a real policy shift in Germany, we also need the whole partners to come along with that. And that's really the biggest question, is how long can we have as a European Zeitenwende, a broad consensus in Europe about these changes in terms of policy towards Russia, support for Ukraine. And, Germany can't do it alone. It needs, yes, it can supply, weapons and support and financial assistance, but it needs the partners. And there, I think we need to have a broader, in a certain way, kind of alliance, and that is getting more challenged with elections, not just Slovakia, but other elections which are showing the weakness of that kind of broad base of support across the European continent.
But I think when it comes to the partners, so there are definitely EU member states who see Germany as the problem, as a partner. When you look at the Baltics, when you look at the Poles, so but maybe, Rachel, we can turn to you here and go again. So is it really communications? Because Olaf Scholz has been very hesitant I think there is no European country where each single weapon delivery hasn't sparked a public debate and a back and forth and kind of pretending like that our 15 Leopards would change Putin's mind and we cross the red line. So is it just communication, or what is behind this sluggishness when it came or when it comes still? Now we have the Taurus debate.
Yeah. So I think there's the facts, and then there's the communication. So Germany has been rather slow. So now they're the second biggest, but that's a relatively recent development, right? The UK was out there first, not to mention the US. And so it took Germany a while to get to the level where it arguably should have always been, which it's at now. So there are the facts that it has, in fact, just been slow. But I think there's communication as well, except for, I suspect, and Christoph, you're the politician, so you might be able to correct me, I think it's on purpose. I think Scholz is communicating with his internal, rather skeptical audience and is willing to take the price that the partners are also listening to this communication, and they're not happy with it. So he has been, I think, not accidentally, but actually very much on purpose, positioning himself as a very reluctant supporter. And therefore, it seems like he's a reluctant supporter to all of the partners. And if you add on to that the kind of historic German skepticism of the worries of the partners in the East, it's a difficult message. It might be still the important message, because maintaining political support for this level of spending is important. But I don't think it's an accident, actually.
Christoph, maybe you can help us to look into the soul of the Social Democrats and Social Democratic base. So, is Olaf Scholz, with this sluggishness, playing to his base and ready to pay the price of losing the trust or at least kind of losing some trust with the partners?
Well, I mean, maybe we start at the point that you have mentioned before. Look from where do we come from. We don't have that strategic debate inside this German society, and we don't have it in the Social Democratic Party, or we didn't have it so far. So we have to develop that, and Olaf Scholz sees we have to keep support for a very long time. We can't afford to lose majorities in politics for supporting Ukraine and to work closely with our allies. So that's why he is very cautious with every step, showing I'm not a politician who risks a lot for Germany. I'm cautious, you can trust me, and so you can trust me with every step. I think about it before I decide. This is one side. The other side is also, for Scholz, it's very important to keep all the partners together. And we have different opinions inside Europe. He has tried to be very close with the Biden administration. Biden was also cautious with certain steps of support. And he wanted to show with our most important ally, we go together step by step. We discuss it with each other, we decide it with each other. And if you look at the figures, there's only, you have mentioned 15% in German population that say it's not enough. Most of them say it is enough, the right speed, and around 40% say it's too much. So you have to balance that politically, and that is what Scholz does.
Talking about the partners, so it's especially in the beginning when it came to the weapon deliveries. So the Germans would often hide. So other partners were already delivering, and the Germans would hide and say, "Oh, we have to coordinate with our partners." And I think there was also this dynamic where the French and the Brits were saying, "We are already delivering, feel free to go ahead." And he still insisted. And then there was this impression that in the end, it's about one partner, it's about the United States. So again, when it comes to this dynamic with the partners, we're catering to some partners but alienating others. So how would you assess that?
Yeah, but it's again, a difficult balance. I mean, for Germany, it's very important to keep United States as a very close partner in this situation. We still, and for a long time, we still have the situation we depend on American support. Europe is not capable to defend itself. So to have that in mind, it is very important to discuss every step with Washington and to decide together. And if Paris is upset for a moment, okay, they are upset. But you see also when Germany has decided, we launched the European Sky Shield initiative, France was reluctant to join because they say, but you make a step without any further discussion, you are too fast, and we want to develop our own system, you can't buy just from the States and from Israel. And Scholz has said, no, in this point I insist, we do that initiative and we want to have it fast, so we buy from the United States. Every step you do, it is debated inside Europe, and you have any step you have to think about, okay, can I move? Do I have to wait? How can I decide with partners together? One of the most important things is, and this is debated also a lot, how long can we make sure that this process is supported by a majority of voters? We have that discussion in the United States. We have that in Europe, different European countries. So, and if we lose the support, then we are in a dead end. So we have to have that in mind with all the steps we do, and this is what the German government does.
Richard, I think you would like to come in on that. I think it's important to note that, keeping the voters on board, Zeitenwende is of course not only about to support Ukraine, but it's also of the defense of Germany, to get the Bundeswehr ready and up to speed again, because it has been neglected, because we thought we are surrounded by a ring of friends. But obviously that's not the case. But I you
Yeah,
wanted
I mean, just
comment?
to Christoph's point, or also your question, I mean, it's going to be a strange statement for a transatlanticist to make, but I found it surprising and frankly slightly disappointing the focus that Scholz has placed on the US as the partner in this case. I mean, it's of course obvious. I don't like to know what would have happened if we hadn't had Biden's leadership. But from a party that, previous Chancellor candidate was, a former head of the European Parliament, I would have expected a sort of stronger European muscle in a challenge like this. And I've been really surprised to see, this Chancellor cuddling up so closely with Biden and really focusing on that partnership and, neglecting European leadership also in the, Sophia Besch says this, and I think it's great. German has this term führen, but there's also the term zusammenführen. So to lead by bringing together, which is sort of the best kind of German leadership when they choose to do it in Europe, and we haven't seen enough of that, and that surprises me. It would be less surprising maybe from different party leadership, but this party leadership, I find it rather surprising and disappointing.
Let's look at the two litmus tests coming up for the Zeitenwende, for the seriousness. One you already touched upon is the 2024 budget. So are we going to really spend that money on defense? And then the second one is really kind of how does this have implication on our policy towards China? So when you look at the China strategy that the Bundestag or the government just came out with, so maybe we can address these 2 points and also see, what are the lessons learned and how they are being applied. And Florian, maybe you want to take the first step on what do you see as the lessons learned as the Germans move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe add to the litmus test also the question of, again, the strategy for the whole question of enlargement. I mean, I think that's also for me, a big question, because, I mean, one of the responses has been, Ukraine's application to the European Union and the whole question of how to accommodate a different European Union. And there, I think, because this is looking beyond the purely defense perspective and just looking at it in yes, preparedness for dealing with China, like long-term commitment, what you discussed in the budget, but I think there is the question of how does Germany see the European Union with Ukraine in it and also with the Western Balkans in it. And I think this is really, this strikes me as a very essential debate, which I haven't seen enough debate in Germany about that, really, in terms of how to envisage the European Union and the whole discussion about how to get the European Union ready for enlargement. And I think we have to take Ukraine's bid for the European Union very seriously. I mean, it is, of course, being taken seriously, but I think that requires also a very serious kind of soul-searching in the European Union about how to get it ready. And I mean, we've had the mention of the date 2030 as a date when not countries would join necessarily, but when the European Union would be ready. And that requires treaty changes. I mean, very simply. I mean, and that's something which we all know how difficult it is. Especially with Hungary, but also some of the other member states. And yes, we have the Franco-German, think tank proposal how to reform the European Union, but I think it really then has to be taken further into a process which really, reimagines the whole enlargement process on one side when it comes to questions which some countries like Austria and others are proposing, the staged process of early benefits. But I think this is something where I think more German leadership and more German kind of also vision would be essential. And that is the test really of also, again, what happens after the war, whatever the war will look like, whenever it will end. I mean, the short term is, how to, supply Ukraine with the weapons it needs so it can win the war. But then, then there is not just reconstruction, but there is the vision of having Europe with the Ukraine, and that, brings all kinds of challenges. That would be, one of the big member states of the European Union in terms of size, population, and so on. And there, I think we need a bit more of this vision and a debate also how to make that vision real in changing the decision making in the European Union and make it tangible. Because I think again, this is not something which is about saying, Ukraine can join at some point in the future. We need to think about realistic timeframes also for the Western Balkans. I mean, one of the lessons now this year is 20 years since the Thessaloniki promise. It's one thing to say, we promise you a European future, but if you don't follow up on it and if you don't make it real, then you're going to wait for 20 years and then you're going to have an embittered region. And the same is the risk for Ukraine. I mean, if Ukraine doesn't get a realistic prospect for joining the European Union, it might win the war, but Europe might lose the peace in terms of a Ukraine which feels it's actually left out, might become the Turkey of relations with the European Union, and that is hardly desirable for the European Union and for Ukraine. So I think I would add that as a key litmus test for German preparedness for the future.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think you're absolutely right. When you watch the German debate outside the Berlin think tank community, I think that this is not in talk shows, this is not widely tackled in the media. And so, Rachel, let me ask you to address the China question. So when you see the German debate, it's, you hear voices from business, Russia is not China, China is after the EU, the biggest trade partner of Germany. So how do you see lessons applied from the experience with Russia?
I mean, insufficient would be my verdict thus far. The direction, I think, is there potentially, but it's not enough, and it's a bigger challenge in a way that, we saw how costly it was for Germany to correct its poor investment or its poor strategic decisions when it came to energy reliance on Russia. And there isn't a similar kind of option to quickly course correct, if things come to a head as quickly with China. So there are still many prominent voices saying China's not Russia, who don't want to adapt the lessons one-to-one. And maybe you don't have to adapt the lessons one-to-one, but you should adapt at least part of the lessons. We have, for example, the numbers with Huawei, so the Chinese role in 5G critical infrastructure. I think this is a sort of a telling example. And it's been, debated for a while, and it's actually been quite clear. The signals have been relatively clear to German business that this was going to be a risky investment. And now you have Germany with the third highest dependency in Europe on Chinese infrastructure in its 5G networks, something like 60%, 59, 60%. And France, for example, in the meantime, has been quietly reducing its Chinese dependence on its infrastructure. So it's at 17%, right? This is going to be really expensive to change this. I've heard people say, for 5G we have basically no chance anymore. It's 6G we have to look at. So this is the kind of pace that German business has been taking. There is a sense of, getting everything you can get out of the situation before it's too late, and that is not the bedrock for good strategic decision making. Now, the China strategy from the government was decent. I think there was a lot of relief in Washington, for example, if not yet euphoria over the strategy, but there was a relief that there politically is a realization about the importance of de-risking. The question will be if it's going to be forceful enough toward German business to start making these shifts a little bit ahead of time and not too late.
Yeah. Christoph, the SPD, the Social Democrats, are the party of Ostpolitik. So how do you see the relationship with Russia developing in the long term?
Well, I mean, it depends on how the war ends, and it depends when Putin is not anymore in power. I mean, as long as Putin is in power, there is no cooperation, there is no common security possible in Europe. You can only organize security against Russia. That is our task for the coming years. So that's very clear inside SPD. And but what I wanted to add, maybe one point to the European strategy, because in our debate, also in the Social Democratic Party, but in the government as well, is the enlargement is necessary. It is a geopolitical imperative, but it is only possible if the EU reforms itself, its institutions. So for that purpose, Germany and France have initiated a common working platform, and they have just published their results with certain proposals how could we come from the situation where we are now to a better decision making inside EU. As long as one country can veto any decision in important fields and use that veto also to get something in another field that is not connected with the decision, the European Union would not work, and it would destroy itself if the European Union enlarges without reforming itself. So we put a strong focus on that internal reform now for the coming years to make the EU ready for enlargement. You are right, I agree with you. We have to have also a better idea how the next steps of enlargement could be, but it depends on the partners as well. I mean, we are here in Belgrade, and I don't see that the government here has any interest really in joining the EU and to make the necessary steps, because they are interested that the system can continue as it is. So, and it would not be able to continue as it is when it joins EU. So it depends on the partners as well. To come to China, yes, it is much more complex to reduce dependencies from China than it was in one field of energy supply from Russia. But the German new China strategy says clearly we need de-risking. And the question is now, how fast are we with that? And I was among those in the parliament that have fought for some years already. We have to reduce our dependency in 5G infrastructure from Huawei. But nevertheless, we are dependent to more than 50% on Huawei. And now the Minister of Interior has made a proposal reducing Huawei in the 5G network. But it's not agreed inside the government, because the liberals say, no, we don't want that. This is too much, the state is too much intervening in the economy in that field. So I don't know how this fight will end up, but step by step we have to look at critical infrastructure here and what does China in our critical infrastructure, but we have to look also, we depend a lot if we want to reach our goals in environmental policy and in our climate policy. We are dependent on China. In solar power rollout, we depend for more than 90% on China. So to shift that and to get new supply chains and diversify the dependencies, it will take years. So, and that is the task we see, and we will do it step by step. But I see also that we have in some of the industries different opinion about that. They see that huge market and the cooperation and the possibilities, and they don't see the political risk. And I think in this field we have to work closer inside the European Union, but again also closer with the United States, our most important ally. And it's not impossible. I mean, we export more to the Netherlands than we export to China. China is in export, is around 7% of our export, and also United States is a much bigger partner in export than China is. So let's step up, I would say, and do the necessary step for de-risking.
Well, I think what we just discussed shows really how deep Zeitenwende runs. So it's not just, upping your defense budget, but it goes to the heart of the foundation of the German success model. So Constanze Stelzenmüller coined this phrase that the success of the German model is based on outsourcing security to the US, exporting to China, and getting cheap Russian energy. And all those three things don't work that well anymore, or don't work at all. So Germany is really at a point where it has to reinvent itself at a time when the country is kind of entering a phase of recession, and you cannot easily kind of cover everything up with money. I want to spend a few minutes on the domestic mechanism. So for the first time, Germany has a three-party coalition, the Ampel, the Greens, Social Democrats, Free Democrats, that needs a lot of internal coalition building. There is a lot of infighting. The approval ratings for the Ampel are really, really low. So maybe we can drill down a little bit, kind of what are the dynamics within the Ampel in terms of Zeitenwende, and how does it play out? I don't know who would love to take that on. Rachel.
I mean, I can start. So the challenges are really only getting bigger, right? You have the China de-risking challenge. You have the challenge that you mentioned of sort of what's Germany's new model in an insecure world where it hopefully will be spending 2% at least on defense, and spending it better is the other question. You have really challenging enlargement decisions, and you have a political landscape that makes all of that more difficult. And I don't get the sense of urgency in the current coalition, the sense of urgency that you had in the Zeitenwende speech, partially because Ukraine has done such a good job of defending itself. The immediate security urgency is gone, but I think the urgency to address these challenges, as long as the political system, as difficult as it is functioning somewhat well, is not there, because what you didn't mention is the far-right party. We have now a very big actor. It's the second biggest actor in the according to the latest Sonntagsfrage Sunday polls, right? Second biggest support is going to the Alternative für Deutschland. So this is a party, even if you put aside all the kind of far-right anti-European problems, it's also not a party that's interested in reasonable solutions or a positive political agenda to actually tackle any of these issues, meaning the debate space in which to enact all of these very difficult policies is getting slimmer, because you have a party that will pretend that Germany doesn't have to do any of this stuff. And so we're seeing that the coalition isn't really managing. You did have the initiative from Scholz to say we have some really big challenges. I'd like the opposition CDU to join us, which is politically a little difficult for the CDU. So we'll see. But the political landscape, the Ampel is challenged. The opposition is worried about its right flank. So I would say a lot of its suggestions right now are also more about scoring political points with its right-wing voters than about Germany's challenges. And that I find very worrying. Sorry to be so depressing. Hopefully someone has something better
Christoph,
to say.
are you worried about the stability of the Ampel?
Well, I think the Ampel will be stable until the end of the legislation period, especially if you look now to the numbers in the opinion polls. If it's not stable, it can only lose. If it is stable, it still has a chance to win. So they will stay together. But yes, the political space to maneuver is shrinking. So, and what we have seen in the last time, that the Liberal Party, because they lost several state elections, they decided to become a kind of opposition inside the government. So that's created a lot of debate and you can see the decline of the trust into the government. We are below 20% now. We started with almost 60, we are below 20%. And in the same time, you can see the rise of the right-wing populist party, the AfD. They went up, they came from around 10% in the last election, and they are now in the opinion polls 22, 23%. So, and one reason for that rise is that people don't trust in the government because they fight. So, the second huge problem that drives the right-wing populists is the migration question. So, what could the government do? They have to, first, they have to really sit down and think, how can we solve major problems inside so that we cooperate in a better way and we show to the public this government works together. And second is, how can we tackle the migration question inside Germany? This is why the talks with the opposition as well, with the CDU, and inside Europe. So we have a first decision inside Europe now. And I see this as the only way for the coming 2 years, the rest of the legislation, to look at certain points where you can reduce the friction inside the government, show to the public that you solve certain problems and you go steps forward to gain trust again. Otherwise, we will see a very strong right populist party in the next federal election. And I don't believe that the stability of democracy is really threatened because the right populist party has almost reached its limits of people that say they could imagine to vote for such a party. And we have a very strong part in the society that say they could never imagine to vote for such a party. So the stability is still there, but the room for political maneuver is shrinking.
Yeah.
So we have to address that.
Yeah. Thank you. Before we are going to open it up for questions, Florian, I want to ask you, you touched on that more leadership is needed within the EU. So when we look around, we have the war in Ukraine, we had Nagorno-Karabakh have a reason. Now we have kind of war by Hamas on Israel. And then there is Trump, the potential re-election of Trump looming large. So there is a real need for leadership in Europe within the EU. How confident are you that Germany will step up to the plate?
Well, I mean, I think the other elephant in the room we haven't mentioned so far is, of course, that there are going to be European elections next year, and I think that's going to be, much before that, before the German elections. And of course, the real challenge is that we might see a very strong far right across the European continent. I mean, including Germany, but also Austria and France and so on. And I think that's really going to shape also the ability for European leadership, because what is the next Commission going to be looking like? I mean, it surely, will not include the far right, but it's certainly the far right will shape the response of the other parties to the next commission. And I think that is a real question of whether or not, and I think this is one of the big risks we're seeing, is that mainstream parties respond to the challenge of the far right by adopting some of the messages. And I think that is the biggest risk, that, the far right, and I would agree with you that the risk that they will be threatening democracy is slim, but that they dictate the agenda and hijack the agenda is, I think, the biggest risk, that we end up talking about migration only instead of actually seeing that this is maybe not the biggest challenge, or that, in fact, the rise of the far right is not always because of migration, but they use this issue. And that also leads to the situation where, when we go back to Borrell's ring of fire metaphor you've also alluded to, it kind of, the response is we need to isolate ourselves from this ring of fire, or this is in a certain way, we just need higher walls and then we'll be safe. And I think the one lesson is actually that's quite the wrong response. I mean, Europe might be surrounded by conflicts, but it's not that the walls will not solve it. And also leaving these conflicts unresolved, I mean, Nagorno-Karabakh is the best. It shows very well that if you neglect conflicts and if you hope they're going to go away by closing your eyes, you're actually going to encourage actors to seize the opportunity of other conflicts. And Hamas is the same story. Frozen conflicts have a tragic way of becoming unfrozen when the opportunity is right for the party. So yes, I mean, I think we need European leadership. Can Germany step up to that? I mean, I'm skeptical exactly because I don't see that at the moment. And also I see in the European Union not a recognition of the seriousness of having Europe needs to be in a leadership position, but we see Europe speaking with multiple voices. We saw this even, a few days ago in response to Hamas's attack, where different commissioners said completely different, contradictory messages, which is a devastating image of Europe, which, should have on these issues quite a clarity, at least on very fundamental issues. I mean, we're not talking about big things, but even about, do we fund the Palestinian Authority or not? I mean, and I think there one needs to, at a certain way, really look, kind of in the mirror and say, the next commission maybe should be actually geopolitical. I mean, the current one, it says to be geopolitical, but it's actually not in many ways. But but also value-based again. I mean, this purely kind of transactionalism, which has creeped in European policy when it deals with the Ring of Fire, with Tunisia, for example, where one says, well, we'll deal with a guy who abolished democracy as if he's a regular partner. There I would hope a little bit more moral clarity on the European Union, which doesn't mean, kind of not living with realities as they exist, one has to work with, but I mean, it creates a message that Europe is just as transactional as Trump is sometimes. And, speaking in this country where there's also a sense that sometimes the EU looks the other way when it comes to the problems of democracy in Serbia, not to mention other countries. I feel like there's a sense that the EU is not living up to the kind of values it seeks to promote, and there I think one could expect a bit more leadership. But I'm skeptical because we are in a situation where we have actually the more kind of authoritarian populist parties getting to be more
We will
powerful.
propose this as a panel for the next conference. So I now would like to open it up to questions. So let's take maybe 3. There is one here. If you could briefly identify yourself.
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm Gregor Meyer, the regional correspondent for the German press agency DPA. My question goes mainly to Mr. Bieber, since he is the expert. It's a very short question. Where is the Zeitenwende in the German politics, European politics, Western politics towards the Balkans?
Thanks.
Let's take 2 more. I have one here and one, the lady in.
Thank you very much, Birgül Demirtaş, Turkish-German University. I have 2 brief questions. My first question is related to the concept of civilian power. After the Second World War, civilian power concept has become, the key word to explain the German foreign and security policy. Do you think with this Zeitenwende, has this concept become now irrelevant to explain the new German foreign policy? Germany, I mean, this civilian power role has become, a defining or distinguishing characteristic of German foreign policy. Do you think now it is just over and Germany has become like a kind of normal country in quotation marks? And my second question is with your ideas about the future scenarios. If the war between Ukraine and Russia becomes a protracted war, if there is no end in sight, if the war continues for the years ahead, do you think would the current German policy continue the way that it is? Do you think that would be kind of a change in the public opinion in Germany? Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then one more.
I published a paper on Zeitenwende and the analysis of the actually first national security strategy of Germany. Sorry if I didn't hear that you mentioned it, but it is the first national security strategy, and I read a lot about it and discussions that were taken, etc., etc. So yes, the feminist foreign policy is one of the also Zeitenwende, let's say like that. But what was interesting for me is the relation of that feminist foreign policy, and it is actually not new in the international relations theory with the arms sale and the military industry complex, because the whole issue and the story of Zeitenwende is increasing of defense spending and actually revitalization of the whole military industrial complex, and and we know that it was constrained because of the end of the Second World War. So I wonder just, and I saw some reactions in Asian countries. They were afraid of a larger arms sale, German arms sale in some of the Asian countries. So does actually Germany want to have a leading role in Europe? Should it have a leading role in Europe, or should it be still a little bit constrained and maybe behind some processes because of maybe the lack of trust in very strong Germany in Europe and in the world? And I'm specifically also concerned about the UK role in all of this. So what is the reaction of the UK to this, let's say, rise of the military spending and arms sale of Germany? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we can take one more and then bring it back to the panel. So we have the gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is George Terek. I'm advisor since recently to the opposition parties in Serbia. I have one question in terms of the leadership that you were mentioning previously, that the European Union is currently in very need of. Economic crisis, we need a stronger leadership. Migration crisis, we need a stronger leadership. COVID crisis, we need a stronger leadership. War on the borders of the European Union, we need a stronger leadership. What is the time that the leadership is really going to comprehend this fact?
Okay.
At what time is it going to emerge? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think there was this one big question that I heard in three questions, the question for leadership in Europe, within the EU. Who would like to take that on?
Maybe I start. I think the question is not only leadership, yes or no. The question is also what kind of leadership. And Germany has tried also in the past to be a power inside Europe that tries to bridge different opinions inside Europe and bring them together. And this is still a task. Europe is a difficult entity that you have to manage. And if you want to make Europe strong and a geopolitical power, it only works if you manage the inside conflict. So this is one of the biggest tasks of leadership, German leadership inside Europe. And Germany was able to be mainly a civil power as long as we had a kind of security order in Europe that worked. But that is destroyed. It is not anymore there. So we have to step up to become a military power. And I would say again, because before the Iron Curtain were opened, Germany has spent more than 3% for his defense budget of GDP. So, and we had a much stronger army in Germany, conventional army. So we have to step up that because Europe has to defend itself against a threat that comes from Russia. And there is no other way for the coming years than to deter Russia. So there's no space for maneuver. That has to be done. The other side is making Europe a geopolitical power means also to act, that was one part of the discussion, in the conflicts around Europe. And there again, first step is to get political agreement on how Europe should act. And that is often difficult. And that's why we say we need this reform of institutions and we need decisions by qualified majority so that we can act faster and we are not in a situation that the single country can block decisions. This is one of the main tasks for the coming years, from my point of view, to make the European Union fit for the future and fit for purpose.
Yeah. Rachel, please pick, and then we will have Florian take the one that was specifically addressed to you.
So, I mean, to combine it with the question about civilian power and also feminist foreign policy and German leadership, I don't see this government leading in Europe. I think the chance might be if France would stop waiting for Berlin, find another power, and then Germany could play the role of connecting some more actors. I don't see Germany giving up its its restraint in a military sense and its civilian power identity, to me the answer is to invest more in European capacity, right? That's how Germany can be leading in Europe, be a better security actor without worrying allies or giving up key parts of its identity. I don't see a conflict, or there doesn't have to be a conflict there. I also think there doesn't have to be a conflict between feminist foreign policy and defense capabilities. I point to Finland always. I think you can be capable of defense and still be a feminist power. So that would be my hope. And I think the answer is a European answer, which we don't have yet. Yeah. We don't have it coming from Berlin, and I don't think the initiative will come from Berlin, but I'm hopeful that they at least won't block it. My answer on Ukraine is more depressing, which is to say, if the war continues and the US stops supporting it, then I see European support crumbling very quickly, unfortunately.
Thank you. And then Florian, to you, again, Zeitenwende in the Western Balkans?
Yes, I mean, I would say, as implicit in the question, I think there hasn't been a Zeitenwende in the Western Balkans when it comes to German and EU policy. I mean, in fact, we still continue to see, in fact, maybe even more a propping up of authoritarian tendencies in the region. I mean, particularly when it comes to the support the Serbian government has been enjoying by Germany. I mean, I think this is where there's been this kind of, criticism on one side, but actually, kind of economic ties continue. We get very little public criticism. When it came, for example, to the controversial lithium mine project in Western Serbia, the signal was very much from Germany that actually this is something we would like to see. So I feel like there isn't really a kind of a critical push to say, well, we need to also deal with, with local autocrats in a more forthright manner. And I think there was a bit of a missed opportunity in the change of government, even independently of the Zeitenwende, to really kind of reconfigure policy towards the region and to also support more democratic and progressive forces which are challenging the kind of state capture we're seeing across the region. So I feel there's a bit of a missed opportunity, and in fact, rather trying to contain Russia is more important than actually trying to deal with the lack of democracy in the region. And I think that's the wrong conclusion in the end of the day.
Okay. Well, thank you all for taking the temperature on where Zeitenwende stands. It sounds like a lot more needs to be done, and I'm afraid we are out of time. Please join me all in thanking the panel for a good discussion.